The massive doors of the war chamber crashed open with a sound that echoed through the halls of the Vorthic Empire. Every head turned as Commander Zechthel stumbled inside, his footsteps uneven and desperate. The sight that greeted the High Council was nothing like what they expected. This was supposed to be their greatest warrior returning in triumph. Instead, what limped before them looked more like a ghost than a conqueror. Zechthel's armor, once polished to mirror brightness and decorated with the medals of 100 victories, now hung in twisted, melted pieces. His proud battle crest, the symbol of his rank that had struck fear into countless enemies, was singed black and hung limp against his skull. "By the ancient fires," whispered Council Elder Throck, his voice barely audible in the stunned silence. "What happened to him?" The other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had sent Zechthel to Earth 3 months ago with the most powerful war fleet the Vorthic Empire had ever assembled. 50,000 ships, 2 million of their finest warriors. The mission was simple: eliminate the humans and claim their planet as another jewel in the Vorthic crown. It should have been easy. The humans were young, barely evolved past throwing rocks at each other. Their technology was primitive, their weapons laughable. Intelligence reports showed they still fought wars with chemical explosives and metal bullets. How could such creatures possibly stand against the might of an empire that had conquered half the galaxy? Yet here stood their greatest commander, alone and broken. Empress Veshtar rose from her throne, her eyes glowing with the fierce light that had made enemies tremble across the stars. "Commander Zechthel," her voice boomed through the chamber. "Where is your fleet? Where are my warriors?" Zechthel's legs gave out, and he crashed to his knees before the throne. When he looked up, the council saw something in his eyes they had never seen before. Something that made their blood run cold. Fear. Absolute, soul-crushing fear. "Gone," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry leaves. "All gone, every ship." "Every warrior? Every ... He stopped, his whole body shaking as if the words themselves were too heavy to carry. "Impossible!" roared General Krath, slamming his fist on the council table. "You commanded the greatest military force in galactic history. Those primitive humans couldn't possibly." "You don't understand," Zechthel interrupted, his voice growing stronger but more desperate. "They're not primitive. They're not weak. Everything we thought we knew about them is wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong." The council exchanged glances. Had their great commander lost his mind? Was this some kind of elaborate deception? Wars of conquest sometimes broke even the strongest warriors, but Zechthel had never shown weakness before. "Explain." "Yourself," the Empress commanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "Tell us how an empire that spans 3 star systems could lose to creatures who haven't even mastered space travel." Zechthel struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "They have mastered it, Your Majesty. They've mastered things we never imagined possible. When we arrived at Earth, they were waiting for us. Not hiding, not running, waiting." He paused, his eyes staring at something only he could see. "Their leader, their ambassador, she met our diplomatic ship personally. She was small, maybe half our size, with soft skin and no natural weapons. She smiled when she saw us. Actually smiled like she was greeting old friends." "And?" prompted Elder Throck impatiently. "She invited us to tour their newest space station. Said it was humanity's greatest achievement, a symbol of their hope for peaceful cooperation with other species. She seemed so eager to share their culture, so proud to show us what they had built." The commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I should have known then. The way she looked at us like she was studying us, taking measurements, but I thought it was just curiosity. How could I have been so blind?" General Krath leaned forward. "What did you find on this station?" "At first, exactly what she promised. Art galleries showing the beauty of their world. Gardens filled with plants from every continent on their planet. Meeting rooms where their leaders conducted peaceful business. She showed us their children's artwork, drawings of stars and planets and dreams of exploring the galaxy." Zechthel's voice grew darker. "But there were other things. Things that didn't make sense." The station was huge, bigger than some of our fortress worlds. The power readings were off the charts, far more than any civilian facility would need. And the electromagnetic signatures ... double quote, he shuddered. They were all wrong. Wrong how? The Empress demanded. They matched our weapons, our most advanced, classified military technology. This peaceful space station was reading our ships, analyzing our defenses, learning everything about our capabilities. And we just let them do it. The council members began to murmur among themselves, but Zechthel pressed on. The children's artwork I mentioned? I looked closer while the ambassador was explaining their education system. Those weren't just pictures of stars and planets. They were tactical diagrams, battle formations, weapon schematics. The children weren't drawing dreams of exploration. They were drawing lessons in warfare. Surely you're exaggerating, Elder Throck protested. Children drawing military plans? That's absurd. I thought so too, until I saw the rest of their art gallery. Hidden among the peaceful landscapes and family portraits were historical paintings, scenes from their wars, and there were so many wars. Hundreds of them, thousands, these creatures have been fighting each other continuously for their entire recorded history. Zechthel eyes fixed on the Empress. Your Majesty, they don't fight wars like we do. We conquer for resources, for territory, for glory. Humans fight wars for ideas, for concepts they can't even touch. They'll die for words like freedom and justice as eagerly as we'll die for gold and land. That makes them fanatics, General Krath observed. Dangerous, perhaps, but fanatics can be defeated. No, General, that makes them unstoppable. Because when you fight for things you can't lose, you fight with a desperation we've never known. And when you've been fighting that kind of war for thousands of years, you get very, very good at it. The commander took a shaky breath. The ambassador showed us their military history with such pride. She spoke of something called a world war where they fought each other with such ferocity that it nearly destroyed their entire planet, twice, and they learned from it. Every technique, every strategy, every weapon that could kill efficiently. But surely they're still limited by their technology, the Empress said. Though her voice had lost some of its certainty, Zechthel laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what I thought. Right up until she showed me the station's power core. She called it their greatest achievement in peaceful energy. It was beautiful, Your Majesty. A swirling mass of contained fusion reactions that could power their entire homeworld. He paused, his hands clenching into fists. It wasn't until later that I realized what I was really looking at. It wasn't a power core, it was a weapon. The most devastating weapon I've ever seen, disguised as a symbol of peace. One that could turn a star into a supernova. The war chamber fell completely silent. Even the Empress seemed stunned by this revelation. When I demanded an explanation, Zechthel continued, the ambassador's smile never wavered. She said they wanted to give us a chance to leave peacefully. A chance to go home and warn others that humanity preferred friendship to war. But if we chose war instead... He looked around the chamber at the faces of the Empire's most powerful leaders. She said they would make sure the galaxy remembered what happened to those who forced their hand. The memory hit Zechthel like a physical blow as he stood before the council. His mind drifted back to that fateful day when everything changed, when his understanding of the universe was turned upside down by creatures who looked so harmless. It had started perfectly. The Vorthak fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, their ships arranged in the traditional formation of conquest. 50,000 vessels stretching across space like a metal constellation, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a continent. It was meant to be a show of overwhelming force, a demonstration that resistance was pointless, but instead of the panic they expected, something strange happened. The humans sent a single small ship to meet them, not a warship, not even a military vessel. It was painted white with symbols that their translators identified as representing peace and diplomacy. On board was a single human female who introduced herself as Earth's primary ambassador for First Contact Protocols. Zechthel remembered, thinking how tiny she looked standing in his command center, surrounded by warriors twice her size. She wore simple clothes, carried no visible weapons, and seemed genuinely excited to meet them. Her first words were an invitation. "Welcome to our solar system," she had said, her eyes bright with what appeared to be innocent curiosity. "We've been hoping for this day for so long. Would you like to see what we've built while we waited for you?" The invitation was to visit humanity's newest orbital construction, something they called Unity Station. The ambassador explained it with such enthusiasm, describing it as their species' greatest achievement in peaceful cooperation. She spoke of art galleries, cultural exhibits, and meeting spaces designed to welcome visitors from across the galaxy. "We want to show you who we really are," she had said. "Not through words, but through our actions and our dreams." It sounded innocent enough. Intelligence reports had shown that humans were still primitive, barely capable of reaching their own moon with chemical rockets. How impressive could their space station really be? The first surprise came when they saw it. Unity Station wasn't the small, cramped outpost they expected. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, with graceful curves and gleaming surfaces that caught the light of their star in beautiful patterns. It looked more like a work of art than a piece of technology. The ambassador met them at the docking bay personally, still wearing that same warm smile. She led them through corridors filled with displays showing Earth's natural beauty. Waterfalls, forests, mountains, and oceans stretched across video screens, accompanied by soft music that somehow made even hardened warriors feel peaceful. "This is our home," she explained as they walked. "Every species we've met in our imagination has always wondered what other worlds might look like. We wanted to show you ours first as a gesture of trust and friendship." The cultural center was everything she had promised. Art from every human civilization lined the walls, showing the incredible diversity of their species. Paintings, sculptures, and artifacts that spoke of a people who valued beauty and creativity. In one section, children's artwork covered an entire wall, showing their innocent dreams of meeting aliens from distant stars. But Zechthel began to notice things that didn't quite fit. The station's power readings were enormous, far beyond what would be needed for lighting and life support. When he commented on this, the ambassador laughed and explained that humans always built things bigger than necessary, just in case they needed to expand later. "We're optimists," she said. "We always hope for the best possible outcome." In the children's art section, something caught his attention. Mixed in with the colorful drawings of friendly aliens and space adventures were other pictures. At first glance, they looked like abstract art, but as Zechthel studied them more closely, he realized they were diagrams, star charts, tactical formations, weapon designs drawn with the innocent precision that only children possess. When he asked about these, the ambassador's smile never wavered. "Children are natural engineers," she explained. "They love to figure out how things work. Our schools encourage them to think about complex problems from an early age." The historical section was equally revealing. The ambassador guided them through humanity's timeline with obvious pride, showing their development from primitive hunters to spacefaring civilization. But the exhibits focused heavily on their conflicts, wars that spanned continents, battles that involved entire populations, weapons that grew more sophisticated with each generation. "We've learned a lot from our mistakes," the ambassador said as they stood before a display showing the devastation of their world wars. "Every conflict taught us something new about strategy, technology, and the cost of violence." What struck Zechthel most was how casually she discussed destruction that would have horrified most species. Humans spoke of wars that killed millions as learning experiences. They analyzed their own capacity for violence with the same scientific curiosity they applied to exploring space. The technology sections were the most disturbing. The humans had developed weapons far beyond what their apparent technological level should have allowed. Nuclear devices that could flatten cities, chemical weapons that could poison entire regions, biological agents that could wipe out populations without damaging infrastructure. Of course, we don't use these anymore, the ambassador assured them. We've moved beyond such crude methods. Our current defensive systems are much more elegant. She showed them to an observation deck where they could see the station's central core. It was beautiful, a swirling mass of contained energy that pulsed with soft, warm light. The ambassador explained that it was their greatest achievement in peaceful energy production, capable of powering their entire homeworld without any pollution or waste. It represents everything we hope to become, she said, her voice filled with genuine emotion. Clean, efficient, and powerful enough to support any dream we might have. But as Zekthal watched the energy patterns, something felt wrong. The containment fields were too strong, the power output was too controlled. This wasn't just a power source. The engineering principles were too similar to weapons technology he had seen before. During the tour, his science officers had been discreetly scanning the station, gathering data on human capabilities. What they found was disturbing. The station's sensors were incredibly advanced, capable of analyzing their ships down to the smallest detail. Every moment they spent aboard, the humans were learning about Vorthak technology, military strength and tactical capabilities, but it was done so subtly, so naturally, that it seemed like simple curiosity rather than intelligence gathering. The ambassador asked innocent questions about their journey, their ships, their homeworlds. She seemed fascinated by their culture and eager to learn about their society. Only later did Zekthal realized that every question had been designed to extract specific military information. The humans weren't just being friendly. They were conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation he had ever encountered. The final revelation came when they were preparing to leave. The ambassador walked them back to their shuttle, still chatting pleasantly about the possibility of future cooperation between their species. As they reached the docking bay, she paused and looked directly at Zekthal. "I hope you've enjoyed learning about us," she said, her smile taking on a slightly different quality. "We certainly enjoyed learning about you." Something in her tone made him stop. "What do you mean?" "Well, we've been watching your fleet since you arrived. Very impressive formations. Excellent discipline. Your weapon systems are quite advanced for your technological level." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Though I notice you're still using fusion-based propulsion. We moved beyond that decades ago." The words hit him like ice water. "You've been scanning our ships?" "Of course." "Just as you've been scanning our station?" Her smile never faltered. "The difference is we've been completely open about our capabilities. We've shown you exactly what we can do, what we've learned, and what we're capable of becoming." She gestured back toward the station's core, visible through the transparent walls. "That power source you admired? It's not just for peaceful purposes. The same technology that could power a civilization could also tear apart a star. The same principles we used to create could easily be used to destroy." Zekthal felt his blood turn cold. "Are you threatening us?" "Not at all," she replied, her voice remaining perfectly pleasant. "I'm simply making sure you understand the situation clearly. We want peace. We hope for friendship. We've designed this entire station as a symbol of what cooperation between species could achieve." She stepped closer, and for the first time, Zekthal saw something dangerous in her eyes. "But if you choose war instead of peace, we want you to know exactly what you'll be facing. We've spent thousands of years learning how to fight. Every technique, every strategy, every weapon that could end conflicts quickly and efficiently. We've become very, very good at it." The ambassador's smile widened slightly. "We wanted to give you a chance to leave peacefully, to go home and tell others that humanity prefers friendship to war. But if someone forces our hand..." The war chamber erupted in angry voices after Zekthal finished his testimony. Council members shouted over each other, their pride wounded by the suggestion that primitive humans could threaten the mighty Vorthak Empire. But Empress Veshtaris' voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" she roared, her eyes blazing with fury. "One broken commander will not dictate the fate of our empire. If these humans want war, then war they shall have. Within hours, the greatest military mobilization in galactic history began. From every corner of Vorthik space, warships converged on the Imperial capital. Battle cruisers that had conquered entire star systems. Dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets in half. Carrier ships filled with fighter craft that moved like swarms of deadly insects through space. General Krath stood proudly on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Conquest, watching as more ships arrived each hour. "Let the humans see this," he declared to his officers. "Let them understand what real power looks like." The final count was staggering. Over 200,000 ships, each one a masterpiece of Vorthak engineering. 10 million of their finest warriors, veterans of countless campaigns across the galaxy. Weapons that could boil oceans and crack continents. It was enough firepower to conquer 10 human worlds, even if everything Zechthel claimed was true. Empress Vashtar herself would lead this crusade, her presence on the battlefield a guarantee of victory. She stood in her command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the massive fleet stretching across space like a metal sea. "Today," she announced to her forces, "we will teach the galaxy what happens to those who dare threaten the Vorthik Empire. These humans will serve as an example that will echo through the stars for 1,000 generations." The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. During that time, intelligence officers worked around the clock, analyzing every scrap of information about human capabilities. They studied Zechthel S. reports, examined the scanner data from Unity Station, and prepared tactical assessments for the coming battle, but as they traveled deeper into human space, strange things began to happen. Their long-range sensors picked up unusual activity throughout the region. Ships moving in patterns that didn't match civilian traffic. Energy signatures from planets that should have been peaceful colonies. "Your Majesty," reported the chief intelligence officer, "we're detecting military movements across multiple human systems." "It appears they're mobilizing their forces," the Empress laughed coldly. "Let them mobilize. Even if every human picks up a weapon, they cannot stand against." U.S., but the intercepted communications told a different story. The Vorthak had expected to hear panic in human transmissions. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. The humans weren't panicking. They were recruiting. Broadcasting across their entire civilization were messages that chilled even hardened warriors. "Attention citizens of Earth and all colonies." The transmissions began. "Our homeworld faces an existential threat. We are calling for volunteers to defend humanity against an enemy that seeks our complete destruction." What followed wasn't desperate pleading. It was professional, organized, and terrifyingly calm. The humans spoke of defense protocols that had been planned for decades. They mentioned contingency strategies and total war scenarios as if they had been preparing for this exact situation their entire lives. "Volunteer for the Home Defense Fleet," one broadcast continued. "Help us make the stars remember who we are. Help us ensure that anyone who threatens humanity understands the price of that choice." The recruitment messages were accompanied by training videos that made Vorthik intelligence officers exchange worried glances. Humans demonstrated weapons technology that shouldn't have existed. Ships that could fold space in ways that defied known physics. Tactical formations that treated individual lives as acceptable losses in service of larger strategic goals. "They're not just defending their home," observed the intelligence chief. "They're preparing for a war of extermination." As the Vorthik fleet approached Earth's solar system, more disturbing information emerged. Human colonies that had seemed peaceful and agricultural were revealing hidden military installations. Massive shipyards that had been disguised as mining operations. Defense platforms that had been camouflaged as research stations. The humans had spent generations preparing for this moment. Every settlement in their expanding territory served dual purposes. Every civilian facility could transform into a military stronghold within hours. Every citizen had received basic combat training alongside their regular education. "It's impossible," General Krath muttered as he reviewed the intelligence reports. No species maintains this level of military readiness. During peacetime, the cost would be enormous. But the humans had found a way to make it work. Their entire culture was built around the concept of citizen soldiers. Every individual was expected to contribute to their species' defense if needed. Children learned tactical thinking alongside mathematics. Artists studied weapon design. As part of their creative education, scientists developed technologies that could serve both peaceful and military purposes. The intercepted communications became even more chilling as they drew closer to Earth. Human commanders weren't issuing desperate orders. They were conducting calm, professional briefings about acceptable casualty rates and strategic sacrifice zones. They spoke of using their own colonies as bait to draw Vorthok forces into carefully prepared traps. Estimated enemy fleet composition suggests they're planning a direct assault on Earth, one transmission reported. We'll let them come. All outer colonies are prepared for scorched Earth protocols. Nothing useful will survive their advance, and every system they take will cost them more than they can afford. The humans were willing to destroy their own worlds, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. They spoke of evacuating civilians and then turning entire planets into death traps for invading forces. It was a level of strategic ruthlessness that impressed even Vorthok generals, but the most disturbing discovery came when they intercepted internal human military communications. The forces preparing to defend Earth weren't their entire military. They were just their rapid response units and advanced scouts. The real human war fleet was still mobilizing from the outer reaches of their territory. Ships and weapons that had been hidden for decades were finally being revealed. Manufacturing centers that had appeared to produce peaceful goods were switching to military production at rates that seemed impossible. How many ships do they have? Empress Vashtar demanded. The intelligence officer hesitated before answering. We're not sure, Your Majesty. Our estimates keep changing as we discover more hidden facilities. But based on the communication patterns we're intercepting, it could be significantly more than we initially calculated. Even more troubling were the strategic discussions they overheard. Human military leaders weren't just planning to defend their territory. They were preparing to take the war to Vorthok space itself. They spoke casually of sterilizing enemy worlds and making examples of entire civilizations. The goal isn't just victory, one human commander explained in a briefing they intercepted. The goal is to ensure this never happens again. We need to make the cost of attacking humanity so high that no species will ever consider it. They weren't planning to occupy Vorthok worlds. They were planning to destroy them completely, leaving nothing but dead rocks as warnings to the rest of the galaxy. It was a strategy of terror designed to prevent future conflicts by making the consequences of aggression too horrible to contemplate. Zekthal, confined to quarters aboard the flagship, listened to these reports with growing dread. He had tried to warn them, but his broken appearance and traumatic testimony had been dismissed as cowardice. Now he watched as his entire civilization sailed toward destruction, convinced of their own superiority. They still don't understand, he whispered to himself as he stared out at the approaching blue-green world that looked so peaceful and innocent. They think this is about military strength. They think it's about who has the bigger fleet. But Zekthal knew the truth. This wasn't going to be a battle between two military forces. This was going to be a demonstration of what happened when someone forced humanity to show their true nature. The humans had spent thousands of years learning how to fight wars, and they had become very, very good at it. As Earth grew larger in the viewports, human defense platforms began powering up throughout the solar system. Weapons that had been disguised as communication arrays revealed their true purpose. Mining stations transformed into missile batteries. What had appeared to be peaceful infrastructure was unveiling itself as the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed. The trap was ready. The humans had been preparing for this moment since the day they first looked up at the stars and wondered what else might be out there. They had hoped for friends, but they had prepared for war. And now, finally, The galaxy was about to see what humanity looked like when someone forced them to fight for their survival. The war began not where anyone expected it to. As the massive Vorthic fleet approached Earth's solar system, confident in their overwhelming numbers and superior firepower, reality struck them like a hammer blow. The attack didn't come from Earth's defenses or the human ships gathered around their homeworld. It came from behind them. In the heart of Vorthag space itself, the first sign of disaster arrived through an emergency transmission from the Imperial capital. General Krath was reviewing final battle plans when his communications officer went pale, staring at his display screen in disbelief. "Sir," the officer stammered, "we're receiving a priority alert from Home Command. Multiple unidentified ships have emerged from hyperspace in the Vorthic Prime system." The Empress turned from her tactical displays, her eyes narrowing. "Impossible. Our entire fleet is here. What ships could possibly threaten the capital?" The answer came in the form of scanner data that made no sense according to everything they knew about physics. Human vessels were materializing throughout Vorthic territory, appearing from hyperspace jumps that should have been completely impossible. The distances involved were too great, the calculations too complex, and the energy requirements far beyond what their technology assessments had suggested. "How are they doing this?" demanded the chief science officer, studying the impossible readings. "These jump coordinates require computational power that doesn't exist in the known galaxy." But the humans had found a way. While the Vorthak had been perfecting weapons and armor, humanity had been working on something far more dangerous: the ability to appear anywhere, anytime, without warning. Their ships didn't follow the traditional hyperspace routes that every other species used. They had developed technology that allowed them to fold space itself, creating shortcuts through dimensions that other civilizations hadn't even discovered. The tactical implications were terrifying. Every Vorthak stronghold, every fortress world, every military installation was suddenly vulnerable to instant attack from enemies who could appear without any advance warning. The reports flooding in from across the Empire painted a picture of coordinated destruction that spoke of planning spanning decades. Human forces weren't just attacking randomly. They were hitting specific targets with surgical precision, taking out communication networks, supply lines, and command centers with the efficiency of a species that had studied Vorthak weaknesses for years. "They're not fighting like we expected," observed General Krath as he watched the tactical displays update with each new disaster. "They're not trying to match our strength with their strength. They're using our size against us." The human strategy was becoming clear, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of engaging the main Vorthak fleet in direct combat, they had struck at the Empire's foundation. Without communication networks, the various Vorthak forces couldn't coordinate. Without supply lines, their massive ships became useless, metal floating in space. Without command centers, their military hierarchy collapsed into chaos. But it was the nature of human combat that truly shocked the Vorthak observers. Intercepted communications revealed that human commanders treated their own forces with a casual acceptance of loss that bordered on the terrifying. They spoke of acceptable casualty rates and expendable units, with the same calm professionalism that Vorthak officers used to discuss supply requisitions. "Strike Team 7, you're authorized for total commitment," came one transmission that chilled even hardened warriors. "Your mission is more important than your survival. Make it count." And the human crews responded with enthusiasm rather than fear. "Understood, Command. It's been an honor." "Strike Team 7, going to full burn?" The humans fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and suicidal determination that made victory almost secondary to the demonstration of their capabilities. They treated their own lives as tools to achieve strategic objectives, and they wielded those tools with terrifying efficiency. Vorthak ships, designed to intimidate through sheer size and overwhelming firepower, became easy targets for human weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics, weapons that could phase through traditional shields, projectiles that accelerated to impossible speeds, and energy beams that could cut through the strongest armor like it was paper. "How are there?" Weapons so advanced? The Empress demanded as she watched her flagship shields fail under human fire. Our intelligence reports showed primitive technology. The answer was becoming clear through painful experience. The humans had deliberately shown them outdated equipment during first contact. Every scan, every analysis, every intelligence report had been carefully orchestrated to make humanity appear weaker than they really were. While the Vorthak thought they were observing primitive creatures with basic technology, the humans had been conducting the most sophisticated deception in galactic history. The real human military technology was generations ahead of what they had revealed. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target. Weapons that could adapt their frequency and power output in real time, automatically adjusting to overcome any defense. Command systems that could coordinate millions of units across vast distances with split-second precision, but perhaps most terrifying of all was the human approach to warfare itself. As the battle raged across multiple star systems, intercepted communications revealed the true scope of their strategy. This wasn't humanity's full military might. These were just their advanced forces designed to assess enemy capabilities and prepare the battlefield. Phase 1 objectives complete, reported one human commander in a transmission that sent chills through the Vorthak Intelligence Division. Enemy fleet deployment confirmed. All major strongholds mapped and marked. Initiating Phase 2 protocols. Phase 2 turned out to be the arrival of the real human war fleet. Ships began emerging from hyperspace throughout the combat zone, but these weren't the relatively small vessels that had initiated the attack. These were massive constructions that dwarfed even the largest Vorthak dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons that registered energy outputs beyond anything in their experience. The most disturbing realization came when Vorthak strategists analyzed the human battle formations. The humans weren't just fighting to win this war. They were fighting to ensure there would never be another one. Every tactical decision, every strategic move, every target selection was designed with one goal in mind, making the cost of attacking humanity so devastating that no species would ever consider it again. Human forces weren't just destroying military targets. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that made the Vorthak Empire possible. Trade routes, manufacturing centers, communication networks, and civilian installations that supported military operations were being eliminated with methodical precision. "They're not trying to conquer us," realized the chief strategist with growing horror. "They're trying to erase us." As fortress worlds burned and the proud Vorthak fleet found itself scattered and outmatched, the scope of human preparation became clear. This wasn't a desperate defense by a primitive species. This was the execution of a plan that had been developed over generations, refined through countless simulations, and prepared for the moment when someone forced humanity to reveal their true nature. The humans had hoped for peace. They had genuinely wanted friendship with other species. But they had also prepared for the possibility that someone would mistake their peaceful intentions for weakness. And when that mistake was made, they were ready to demonstrate exactly why peaceful species often became the most dangerous enemies. Empress Veshtar stood on her bridge, watching as the pride of her empire burned around her. Her magnificent fleet, her proud warriors, her unconquerable empire were being systematically destroyed by creatures she had dismissed as primitive. The intercepted human communications made it clear that this was just the beginning. "All units, prepare for Phase 3 initiation," came the calm voice of a human commander. "Target confirmation complete. Civilian evacuation windows have expired. Authorization received for total sterilization protocols." The humans weren't planning to occupy Vorthak worlds. They were planning to eliminate them entirely, leaving nothing but dead rocks as monuments to what happened when someone forced their hand. It was a strategy of absolute deterrence, designed to ensure that the lesson learned from this war would echo through the galaxy for thousands of years. As Zekthil had tried to warn them, humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect their species. combined with thousands of years of experience in making those hard choices. The burning sky above the Vorthok capital told the story of what happened when someone made the mistake of attacking beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to survive against impossible odds. The silence was what struck Zekthil first. After months of screaming engines, exploding ships, and the constant chatter of military communications, the small moon where the survivors had gathered felt eerily quiet. Where once the proud Vorthok Empire had commanded half the galaxy, now fewer than 10,000 of his people remained, huddled in temporary shelters on a barren rock that had once been their smallest mining colony. The war had lasted exactly 47 days to reduce the greatest military empire in galactic history to a handful of refugees. The speed of their defeat was almost as shocking as the totality of it. The humans hadn't just won the war. They had rewritten the very concept of what victory meant. Zekthil stood at the edge of the refugee camp, looking up at the human fleet that hung in orbit above them. The ships were massive, their dark hulls blocking out entire sections of the starfield, but they weren't positioned like occupying forces. They hovered like executioners, patient and professional, waiting for the final act of this cosmic tragedy to play out. "Commander," whispered Elderthrock, his once proud voice now barely audible. "What do you think they're waiting for?" Zekthil didn't answer immediately. He had been expecting this moment since the day he first met the human ambassador. He had seen the cold calculation in her eyes, the careful measurement of his reactions, the systematic assessment of his species' capabilities and weaknesses. The humans didn't do anything without a purpose, and their purpose here was bigger than simple military victory. The other survivors moved through the camp like ghosts, their spirits broken not just by defeat but by the manner of their defeat. They had been outfought, and outmaneuvered at every turn. Every tactical doctrine they had relied on for centuries had been turned against them. Every strength they possessed had been transformed into a weakness by enemies who understood warfare on a level they had never imagined. General Krath, now stripped of his rank and reduced to just another refugee, sat staring at a tactical display, showing the final battle statistics. The numbers told a story that defied belief. The humans had destroyed over 200,000 Vorthok ships while losing fewer than 10,000 of their own. They had eliminated entire star systems while suffering casualties that barely registered as statistical noise. How did they know? He muttered, his voice hollow with shock. How did they know exactly where to hit us, exactly when we would be vulnerable, exactly what would cause maximum damage with minimum effort? The answer was becoming clear through painful hindsight. The humans had been studying them for far longer than anyone had realized. Every diplomatic contact, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange had been an intelligence-gathering operation. They had learned Vorthok psychology, tactics, technology, and social structure with the patience of scientists studying lab specimens, but it was more than just intelligence gathering. The humans had demonstrated an understanding of warfare that went beyond simple military strategy. They had recognized that the most effective way to win a war was to make it so devastating that no one would ever want to fight another one. The sound of landing craft broke the oppressive silence. 3 human ships descended from orbit, their engines whisper quiet despite their massive size. They landed at a respectful distance from the refugee camp, and a small group of humans emerged. At their head walked the same ambassador who had welcomed Zekthil to Unity Station months earlier. She looked exactly the same. The same simple clothes, the same warm smile, the same air of innocent curiosity. But now Zekthil could see her for what she really was, one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, disguised as a harmless diplomat. The survivors gathered as she approached, their faces showing a mixture of fear, hatred, and resignation. She stopped at what she judged to be a comfortable speaking distance and looked around at the assembled refugees with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "I want you to know," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the thin air, "that this outcome wasn't what we hoped for. We genuinely wanted peace between our species. We wanted to be friends." Her words stirred anger among some of the survivors, but the ambassador continued before anyone could respond. "But you forced our hand. You came to our home with weapons of war, intending to destroy everything we had built and everyone we loved. We couldn't allow that to happen." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "However, we're not here as conquerors. We don't want your territory, your resources, or your servitude. We're here to offer you something more valuable than conquest: survival." The terms she presented were unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The Vorthak would live, but they would serve a very specific purpose. They would become humanity's messengers, traveling throughout the galaxy to share their story with every species they encountered. "You will tell them what happened here," the ambassador explained. "You will describe how a peaceful species was forced to defend itself and what that defense looked like. You will explain that humanity prefers cooperation to conflict, but that we are very good at conflict when we have no choice. It was a form of mercy that was more terrifying than execution." The survivors would live, but they would spend the rest of their existence as living warnings to the galaxy. Every species they met would hear the story of how the mighty Vorthak Empire was destroyed in 47 days by enemies they had underestimated. "You want us to spread fear," Elder Throck said, his voice bitter with understanding. The ambassador shook her head. "We want you to spread truth. Fear is what people feel when they don't understand the consequences of their actions. Truth is what helps them make better decisions." She gestured toward the refugee camp, where the last remnants of Vorthak civilizations struggled to build temporary shelters. "Look around you. This is what happens when someone mistakes humanity's desire for peace as a sign of weakness. This is what happens when someone decides that violence is the best way to solve problems with us." The psychological impact of their role was precisely calculated. The Vorthak had been proud, arrogant, and convinced of their own superiority. Now they would spend generations as beggars and storytellers, dependent on the charity of species they had once planned to conquer. Every day of their existence would reinforce the lesson that attacking humanity carried consequences beyond imagination. But there was another layer to the human strategy that only gradually became apparent. The ambassador revealed that this wasn't the first time humanity had been forced to defend itself against aggressive species. There had been others over the centuries, and they had all received similar treatment. The galaxy is full of civilizations that prefer diplomacy to warfare, she explained. But there are always a few that believe strength means the ability to take what they want from others. We've made it our responsibility to educate those civilizations about the real cost of that philosophy. The humans had positioned themselves as the galaxy's deterrent force, not through aggression but through demonstrated capability. They didn't threaten other species or demand tribute. They simply made it clear that peaceful coexistence was strongly preferred, and that the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. As the weeks passed and the survivors adjusted to their new reality, they began to understand the full scope of human planning. This hadn't been a war in the traditional sense. It had been a carefully orchestrated demonstration designed to create a specific outcome, a galaxy where species thought very carefully before choosing violence. As a solution to their problems, the humans provided everything the survivors needed to rebuild their lives, but always as charity rather than reparations. They were fed, housed, and cared for, but always as dependents rather than equals. It was a constant reminder of their changed status in the galactic order. Zekthal found himself appointed as the primary storyteller, the one responsible for ensuring that the tale of humanity's defensive capabilities was told accurately and completely. The humans provided him with detailed records of the war, complete with tactical analyses and strategic explanations, so that his audience would understand not just what had happened, but how and why it had happened. The most chilling part of his new role was the realization that this story would outlive him by centuries. The humans had designed their response to create a myth that would be passed down through generations, a cautionary tale that would influence diplomatic decisions for thousands of years to come. As he stood under the alien stars, preparing for Another day of serving as humanity's unwilling ambassador, Zechthel reflected on the terrible irony of his situation. He had come to Earth as a conqueror and left as a messenger. He had sought to demonstrate Vorthek power and instead became proof of human superiority. The humans had achieved something no other species in galactic history had managed. They had won a war so completely and so decisively that the very memory of it would prevent future wars. They had turned their enemies into their most effective ambassadors, ensuring that the lesson learned from this conflict would echo through the stars for millennia, and in doing so, they had guaranteed that no species would ever again make the mistake of confusing humanity's love of peace with an inability to wage war.